So, militarization is basically, I mean, you guys all know what it is. You guys have all seen what happened in incidents like Ferguson. You all seen, the post Boston bomber response, things like that. You generally see kind of the delineation between the police and the military is kind of winding down. We used to have, where we had the guidelines between the two. The distinction was delineated by the Posse Comitatus Act, basically establishing, both in the abstract and in practice, what the actual, what's the jurisdiction of the military, what's the jurisdiction of police forces. So many of you have talked already about the shifting landscape of law enforcement. Now, the premise that, a lot of people like to say, well, why don't we just go, we have COPS, COPS, the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services at the federal level. That was made to promulgate this community policing model. Community policing, and take this from an academic perspective, community policing is the ultimate Rorschach test. In other words, what does a community policing program look like depends entirely on the person that's describing it. Community policing in and of itself, and I know this is controversial in the academic community policing in and of itself is a failure. The reason why, because if we look at what the genesis of policing was, starting back from I would say basically from the founding of the country all the way up until the 1950s, we had perfect community policing. Who wants to go back to the police of the 1930s? That's one of the issues that we need to consider, is that before we had professional policing, community policing basically meant, now that you have your local political apparatus, see Tammany Hall, see Chicago today, your local policing or your local political apparatus now had people with truncheons and guns. So that was the previous model of community policing. Community policing in the era of professionalized policing, it is yet to be executed, because we have this radical debate, I would say, over what constitutes a community. Is a community a group of people ethnically? Is a community a geographic location? Is a community, this is all, if you guys don't enjoy, or if you guys enjoy reading for fun, I would not recommend this, but David DeFay has a book about this. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but David DeFay from SUNY Albany wrote a book on this. And it simply makes the argument that you have competing definitions of community. Community is not a standardized definition. So you really can't say what community policing is. So I think that community policing in and of itself is, it seems good in the abstract, but actually getting 5 people to agree on what community policing is, I think, is a bit of a problem. Being said, should police be more locally responsive? Absolutely. I don't think there's anybody that would say otherwise. You also have to look at police behavior. Now I'm talking about police behavior in individual encounters. I'm talking about police behavior in aggregate. But if we want to talk about incentives, let's look at some of the things that incentivize police behavior. The COPS program is a huge grantor. It literally pays salary. If you want to talk about policing for profit, you can start talking about grant programs as well. There's an article I had. There's an article I had in The Hill. Right after the incidents of, I know it was right after Ferguson, and I can't remember if it was before the Eric Garner decision came down. But I basically, because keep in mind, Obama's response to this was simply, we need to spend more money on policing. I mean, I know, are you guys all sitting down? The federal government says spending more money is the answer. So the problem that I point out with spending more money on policing is the more money we spend on policing is what got us here in the first place. Actually, look at the grants that come from the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Justice Assistance. You have the COPS grants, which again, that's so amorphous, you really can't say what's that funding, but it basically makes a culture of dependence on the federal government. When you start talking about BURN grants or JAG grants, the Justice Assistant grants, that actually has very palpable tie-ins to performance measures that are now starting to shift. You mentioned the drug policy earlier. Well, drug arrests per catchment was actually a major performance measure of whether or not you qualify for burn grants or JAG grants. So the money coming from the federal government incentivized more aggressive enforcement on these particular offenses, and breaking up heroin rings is much more difficult than going down to South Congress on a Friday night and trying to get somebody with a joint. Now, again, that's where local policing comes in, and that's a whole other story. But it represents, here's the corruption of incentives, because their money doesn't come from their taxpayer. And I understand there are deprived communities, so some communities will have to, the state needs to disperse some money. That's an argument that we can have. But the fact that the federal government is actually deciding the earmarks and deciding how this money should be spent and what the performance measures should be, how many people have faith in the federal government? Look at public polling, public opinion polls, fluctuate between 6% and 9%. If you believe in congressional paralysis, if you believe in the inability of the federal legislature to enact to enact what you feel to be right, you definitely shouldn't say they should be the ones deciding what's right for the people that can shoot you. And I know that's a cynical viewpoint, but that's just one way I say it. A lot of people have blamed, and I would not be surprised if this issue came before the courts again, but in Hudson v. Michigan. Hudson v. Michigan is what actually gave we'll say, judicial seal of approval on no-knock raids. No-knock raids are the biggest mechanism by which people get hurt in these militarized police scenarios. So Hudson v. Michigan basically said a no-knock raid is to, the restrictions on no-knock raids were basically to protect the police officers. It does not provide any sort of procedural relief if you happen to fall victim to one. So when we basically see that being, I don't want to say it was a stamp of approval. That's not how federal jurisprudence works. But when we actually got to that point and they said, okay, well, we have a measure of indemnity there, it's going to get used more often. And when it gets used more often, we're going to have instances of SWAT teams busting in and, a person startled and scared trying to defend their property, probably with deadly force, and then they end up shooting and killing a police officer, and then they're brought up on capital murder charges even when no proof of the original alleged crime was actually found. So, talk about a couple of potential solutions, and Matt, jump in at any time, because I just basically pulled these right off the top of my head. Potential solutions for some of the police militarization issues. Some people have said body cameras. I'll be honest with you, I am very skeptical about body cameras being able to make much good. Not.
It's malfunction all the time.
Yeah, no, only when somebody gets shot.
That's the most convenient time.
I was going to say the biggest problem with that is the camera can be on, but who knows if they're going to turn in the footage or log it correctly or
Exactly.
too much in the
There
middle.
are huge evidentiary issues with the body cameras, and the problem, and not only that, but does a certain prevalent pattern of evidentiary practices with the body cameras, does that create any sort of Fourth Amendment exception for future abuses? I mean, these are all like part of the really arcane legal arguments here, but I think it's, it would, the push for body cameras, and don't get me wrong, I think that if we magically had a wand that could put a fully functioning omniscient body camera on a police officer during their entire beat and stored the information and then turned off at the end, that would just be great. The problem is a lot of times when people push this, you don't understand the IT background or the IT infrastructure that needs to be in place for this. Mm-hmm. Before I came to the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I was with a policing research organization, and we actually were considering consulting on a project that the manufacturer of the body cams were going to pony up the cams free of charge. All they had to do, all the police department we were working with had to do, was just pay for the infrastructure backbone. They got several quotes, I think the lowest of which was several $1 million, and this is not a large municipality that we're talking about. So there are cost prohibitive things there. Now, again, that's not to say that it shouldn't be the case. It's just not clearly as black and white. The body cameras are not these panaceas that I think a lot of people.
Yeah.
Oh,
One
sorry.
other issue on the body camera, you don't hear a lot about this, but it's kind of psychological, is that the viewer is seeing this from the perspective of the officer, and they tend to internalize that to their own perspective.
That's super interesting.
Right.
I've
So
No,
never
and
read
I-
that before.
Yeah, so they're seeing this kind of as a, their own things working against officers, as working against them.
Right,
So
and
you've
that-
got a single perspective out there too.
And that's a good point, but I mean, even still, they have studies with, the studies on civilian complaints and whatnot. Those generally do seem to, alleviate some when officers are equipped with body cameras. I think it does provide a certain disincentive for some actions, but again, seeing it as a uniform panacea is kind of a bit of a short-sighted way of looking at it, especially when they come with such an enormous cost. The other one is material oversight, and I mean material, not material with an A, but material with an E, like war material. And so think of the grant programs we talked about earlier. When we talk about militarization, let's talk about the Department of Defense's 1033 program.
It took a long time to get to that.
Well, it took a long time to get to that. But if you look at the 1033 program, do you think that the University of Texas needs a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle?
Yeah. Explain the program really quick.
I mean, after a couple of those football games.
I don't know, but they'd have to bring it out like at the end of the second half, or at the end of the second quarter. No, so the 1033 program, which, to be honest with you, I personally understand
Is this
the
a municipal, like, is this a, what is
state
this
or municipal, when the Pentagon or the Department of Defense has surplus military equipment, surplus war material, they can either put it up for auction, again, depending on specifics of the actual item, they can put it up for auction, or they can actually have people apply to get it free of charge, and then they will deliver it. Now, once it's delivered, the locale has to provide for the armoring. It has to armoring meaning the maintenance. It has to provide for any sort of repairs. So that's how you get certain. I mean, when you talk about
That's why there were tanks in Ferguson, right?
Right.
Those
Right.
things were decommissioned from the military, and they put
Right.
them out on the streets of Ferguson.
right. I mean, I'm
I'm sorry, I just
No,
wanted
no,
to say
I
that.
think you're.
I don't want
I
to
think
add
you're
anything
right.
else.
But again, I think that there's a no black and white here. Now, we had it here in Texas. I can't remember the ISD. Well, first of all, if you're not aware, ISDs have the ability to hire their own police officers. So schools, these aren't school resource officers. These are school district police. There was one ISD that received a cache of, was it grenade launchers? It wasn't grenade launchers.
It's just rifles.
There were 40
Wait,
there
this
were,
is a real thing right now, we're not just.
Texas
Yeah.
Appleseed has a report on all
Yeah.
this 1033 stuff that went to
An
school districts.
independent school
Check it out.
district has grenade launchers?
yeah, but you're thinking grenade launchers, you're thinking of fragmentation grenades, you have gas grenades, you have crowd dispersion grenades.
There's kind of a,
I'm
Texas
saying that
Appleseed's like
facetiously, but yes, the grenade launch, they ended up giving back the grenade launchers.
But they get like field rifles and all this stuff goes.
Mission
on.
accomplished.
Yeah, what did you
There was a small town here in Texas that got a fleet of helicopters from the Department of Defense, wasn't there? And eventually they couldn't even pay for them and had to get rid of them.
No, it was just one helicopter. That was Montgomery County.
They were flying around, it was armed with guns and.
Well, that's what
that
they're
was
doing with the
here-
MRAVs, a lot of
Yeah,
those MRAVs are going back because
the
they can't
maintenance
afford
That
to.
was here local.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they didn't have
Like,
anyone
yeah,
to
yeah.
Right, and they couldn't pay for it, and they couldn't,
Right.
they couldn't maintain it.
Whatever they got it for free, they got a little joyride, and then that's it.
Right.
Bills. I just wanted Derek to kind of go through to transition to that next workshop.
Okay, well,
These things are, I mean, if you want to go real deep on it, I see it as the federal government just needs to keep the contracts rolling for the weapons companies,
Yeah.
and they need someone for all those weapons to go. And I don't know if I'm going too far with that, but that's what I see
No, I
happening.
think you're right on target there. And also, you mentioned prison depopulation. I've heard, and I need to see these, I know you guys may have seen them. Are there contracts that stipulate or occupancy requirements, right? I've heard that those are
It's
out
a
there.
private prison thing, it happens in other states. So I don't
yeah, I
know
would
if
say
you've
not
seen
in
it.
Texas.
I wanted to throw out one more real quick solution to this. It's one that I think I've seen personally, and I feel like there'll be people here that worked on this. So y'all remember when the Austin Regional Intelligence Center was being propped up here?
Right.
I know some of y'all from that.
Yeah, we're all over them.
So, do you remember how bad the grant process was? It was like the city already had the money,
Yes.
and then they were trying to set up this ARIC. So that's this, right? And I think that's the fix at the local level, is that I wish there was a way, or we should figure out a way in city ordinance to require that city council not approve stuff without there being a pretty significant public input opportunity, you know? And a lot of times these are just not, obviously there's certain requirements on some of these grants that there be public input, but it's very rarely meaningful. And you know, we have the Public Safety Commission at the city level. They could be, that'd be an
Public
excellent
Safety
opportunity.
Commission in the Eric example pushed Eric through.
Exactly,
Right.
and it really should have been the other way around.
Yes,
It
and
really should have been like, that's the place where we talk about
They
it.
didn't even read this charter, like, they didn't even read what Eric actually was, they were just like, okay, what you say goes, and they just pushed it right through.
It was like airport advisory.
And those,
commission
and those
on
are
the
all,
duty
those are all
standards,
direct
right?
credit.
One comment on that, though,
Yeah.
our new city council chair of the city council committee is Don Zimmerman for the Public Safety Committee.
Yeah, so I mean, this is like a real
Well,
thing.
things
You
have changed.
I'm saying this in the sense that like, this is actually kind of a vaguely achievable local goal, is to like really ramp up the ability of locals to be involved, people here in Austin to be involved with these grants. Because as you all know from the ARIC example, they approve the grant first, and then you're like, well, what are we not gonna spend this money? And you're like, well, maybe we shouldn't, but it's a little late to talk about that since we already got it.
And to bring that all the way back to the beginning, if you have to look at the way that things are appropriated, everything that goes into a forfeiture account is completely off the appropriations. So I mean, there is no oversight for that but for the agency who owns the account.
But that was done because they didn't want the police departments to be relying on forfeiture for their general operating. Like that makes, it
But
makes sense
that,
that it was such a.
that deeply silos it a lot more. That, if anything, that incentivizes it more.
No, I understand, but that was, the reasoning behind that was that, and I remember
It was actually
hearing someone
determined.
testify, I think
Yeah.
in 2011, a police officer testified that they weren't supposed to rely on forfeiture for their general operations in their yearly budget, because they were trying to avoid that incentive.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
What,
So you went into this, but I don't know where did
Is
this
that the reason
start?
for the no audit?
well,
Is that what you're explaining?
no, so the forfeiture funds are kept completely separate from the budget and, I mean, that's the clearest way to understand it. And the reason for that is because they didn't want police departments relying on those forfeiture funds, you know.
So all the cash doesn't intervene.
Well, no,
No, no,
so
So
that.
they don't have an incentive to do the,
Right, the argument
Like
is it
forfeiture.
doesn't create an
Right.
when
incentive.
actually
To pay the
off-budget
regular
money
operations,
is the
yeah.
perfect incentive.
But
to
it's,
not run
it's,
anything.
yeah, exactly, and I mean, there's your unintended consequence.
Right.
I mean, the fact that we now have a pot of money that exists outside the appropriations.
So I think they're also afraid of the political backlash of putting it into the main buckets.
Well, it would bring up the point
Right, you
where
can't-
we're
it
not
has
gonna
to
be
be
able to
off budget.
pay our bills or pay our salaries unless we confiscate certain dollar amounts of property,
Maybe
right?
go steal some things.
Right.
Isn't it in their budget for the
That's
following
definitely-
year? I mean,
No.
just because it's in a separate account, they allot for that,
Gotta
don't
be
they?
off.
But that goes to my whole point about money being fungible. If every dollar that is legitimately spent per the law out of a forfeiture fund can go again, or can supplant a dollar that was generally appropriate.
Right.
So do you think that it's a possibility to make edits to any of these bills that have been presented to add some sort of an
Amendments.
amendment, thank you, to add some sort of an audit?
Is that possible? Yes, that is a possible legislative outcome, given the structure of our legislature. I can't speak of the pragmatism of it, though.
I think it'd be.
I just want you to say fungible again.
I put the fun back in fun.
The thing with the reporting and the auditing and stuff, I think that the argument, you end up in this funny place where you have to argue like you should be able to use the seized assets to fund your reporting on the seized assets or to fund the auditing. And so it's like a really crazy circle.
Catch-22.
It's like a very circular, I actually think that there's a lot of merit in that idea, and I even think that if you had to give up kind of the compromise and be like, fine, use the money to do the audit, whatever, like, it still would have value, but you just end up in kind of a weird circular conversation.
Exactly,
Yeah.
to point out
I agree with that.
the point out the Hernandez bill and a bill that has not yet been filed, but an office I'd been in contact with, that was, questioning me about this. They wanted, for the body cams, they wanted to use the forfeiture funds.
I've talked to the office as well.
But the thing is, first of all, that's already permitted. I mean, that's
Okay.
that's already
We haven't- this is
explicitly
funny. We haven't
permitted.
actually talked about this. But
Yeah, that's
I know
already permitted under chapter 59. The problem with that is, it's not the fact, again, if we can disabuse you of one notion here, it's not that this money is being spent on the wrong thing, it's that this money exists. And
It's that it's taken.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
fixing
exactly.
stolen property.
Okay, so what, in terms of these bills that we've identified is there a working group of legislative activists that are educating freshman legislators, that are getting ready to testify in committee? Have these committee dates already been assigned? Where are we at, and how can we as a group get organized?
I can
around
speak to
this?
that a little bit.
Okay.
I have, if you're interested, I have the committees that will be seeing these specific bills right here, and who's on them, and their contact information, and where their office is. So I think that's first and foremost, because committee meeting dates have not been set yet. When will that happen? Not for a while.
it probably got another
Meetings are
week or so.
meeting.
Committees are meeting tomorrow. I mean,
The
But to
top
see,
tier
committees met today.
yeah, but to see,
like approps and finance.
yeah, but to see these bills, we don't know
Yeah,
yet.
the traffic hasn't started yet.
But you can start if you're interested in being an activist, you can start creating relationships with these people, because they're gonna be the people that are ultimately seeing that bill in committee.
Okay, but so in terms of just us leaving the room and then trying to figure out what to do here, should we create a coalition and a working group? Obviously, most people are here because of Texans for Accountable Government, but can we work with the ACLU and get organized on how to approach, for instance, the staff, how to structure an argument, speak to the bill, and do it in a persuasive way, and then see which legislators we've talked to, make this an organized effort rather than a spontaneous effort, you know? Are people in this room interested in that, I guess?
Yes.
would be- Okay, so it seems like we could make that group, and then we can work with you. You're that's off the table, right? You're just educating, right?
Just a nonpartisan research.
So we can go to you for the research and all that kind of stuff. So why don't you have your computer, right? So right now, I think it would be extremely beneficial to get signups for this, and we can get your information, and then we can create a game plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
I think that was kind of the final goal of the to gauge interest and get people ready to take action on this, and I'll spearhead this and.
Do we have this
work
in
with
Chris
Matt.
Howell's tool, or?
I'm sorry?
Is anybody using Chris Howell's tool?
I would love to use Chris Howell's tool. I haven't played with it enough.
Well, we need to.
Yeah.
And we'll dump these bills in there so we can collaborate.
Yeah.
So let's get this going.
And the other thing is, like I said early on, these are not the only bills we'll see. There may be another bill coming out. I'm not gonna speak to who it was, who it may be, but there may be another bill that's much more impactful on this problem that we'll see. And once that's out, I think we'll garner even more excitement about being active on this issue. So, and if everyone's on tag email list in here, or if you're not, please give us your email. We can put you on there. Then we can send out a newsletter if another bill does get filed.
Yeah, so we'll create a legislative working group around this specific
Yeah.
issue. Here, let's get this going. Wait, I guess you could take us out on a
Yep.
final word, and then I'll get this
I
going.
just-
And
I mean-
please, if you are interested in this issue, see me before you leave, and we'll get your name here. We'll ask you if you're already a part of TAG, if you want to be signed up for the TAG newsletter, that sort of thing. We'll inform you as to when the TAG events are, but more importantly, we'll get you mobilized, and we'll all work together collaboratively during this session now around this specific issue. And if you want us to leave you alone after that, we'd be happy to. But let's come together now.
And can we give an overview of the other issues that we're working on too?
Yeah, I was gonna have a separate, we just, that garnered so much interest and conversation that we didn't get a little deeper into militarization, but there are some bills that I think will be coming out. I haven't done the front end work well enough to know, but I think there'll be a confidential informant bill, and I plan to do another workshop centered around militarization issues, and we can bring Derek in on on a personal level, and I know Matt would. But I need to do a little more front end research to know what's out there for us to advocate for. So we'll get back to you on that one. I just want to thank both these gentlemen for their breadth of knowledge. Amazing the amount of knowledge you guys have about these issues and what you are doing for making reform, even though it might be slow. We're idealists. We're idealists. So that's why we're here, right? So thank you everyone for coming. I don't really have anything else, and I hope to see you at the next one. Next week we have.
Marijuana.